The night was heavy with smoke and the stench of rot. The Red Wedding had already passed into infamy, a massacre that left banners stained with blood and hope crushed beneath treachery. Robb Stark, the young wolf, once hailed as the king in the north, lay cold and lifeless, his body desecrated, mocked with the head of grey wind stitched upon his shoulders. His mother's screams had died into silence, and the Frys believed they had ended the Stark line with steel and betrayal. But death has never been a permanent thing where dragons walk. Years later, when Daenerys Targaryen finally set foot on Westerosi soil with her dragons, word of the North's broken spirit reached her ears. Jon Snow fought in the shadows of bastards and wildlings, Sansa was a whispered name in hiding, and Arya was more ghost than girl. But Robb Stark, his name was a symbol. A fallen king whose betrayal became the story of every house that bent knee to lions or cowered before Freys. Daenerys listened as old Northmen begged for vengeance, for justice, for their king to be remembered. But she was no stranger to impossible dreams. In her heart a thought stirred, a wild, dangerous thought. The dragons had brought fire and death, but could they not also bring rebirth? On a moonless night, she ordered Robb's remains brought from the desecrated halls of the twins. Many called it madness. Ser Jorah's brow furrowed with worry. Tyrion, sharp-eyed and cautious, warned her that such a spectacle would bind her reputation, not with awe but with fear. Yet Daenerys, hardened by visions of prophecy and whispers of destiny, was unmoved. By the pyre, she stood with Drogon, Rhaegal and Viserion circling above. The Northmen wept openly, whispering prayers to old gods and new. The Dragon Queen raised her hands, her silver hair catching the light of the torches, and gave the command. The dragons roared as one, their fire spilling across the pyre. Robb's bones glowed red, then white, consumed in a blaze hotter than any forge. The flames stretched high, devouring night itself. The crowd shielded their faces, some falling to their knees, some screaming that this was blasphemy. And then, through the roar of fire, came a sound that froze every heart, a howl. Deep, guttural, not holy wolf, not holy man. The flames parted like curtains, and from them staggered a figure. Flesh had been seared, then remade, pale as ash but unbroken. His eyes glowed faintly with fire. His hair burned away, save for tufts of dark strands. Robb Stark breathed again, but he was not the boy who had fallen in betrayal. He looked at Daenerys with eyes that burned faint orange, neither alive nor dead, and spoke a voice rasped raw. "Why have you brought me back?" The crowd gasped, many falling to their knees. To the Northmen, it was a miracle proof that the old gods had not abandoned them. To the Queen's men, it was something else, an abomination, a reminder that fire does not only give life, but also takes it in ways mortals cannot control. Daenerys did not flinch. She stepped forward, her gaze unyielding, and answered with calm conviction, "To finish what treachery stole from you, to take back your throne, to unite wolf and dragon." But in her heart, even she could not ignore the shadow that clung to him. Robb Stark had returned, but the fire had changed him. His flesh bore no wounds, yet his soul carried a weight that made his voice break like thunder. He remembered the betrayal, the knives, his mother's last scream, and in his fury there was no mercy. The North had a king once more, a king reborn from fire and ash. But as the flames smouldered and the dragons hissed, whispers spread among the onlookers, a cursed king. A king who should never have walked again. The hall in Winterfell had never felt so divided. Once its walls rang with laughter, music, and the warmth of hearth fires. Now the banners of the direwolf hung heavy, and silence cut deeper than any blade. At the center of the great hall stood Robb Stark, resurrected by dragonfire, his very presence a storm none could ignore. He looked much as he had in life, tall, broad-shouldered, still carrying the stance of a king, but the fire had left its mark. His eyes glimmered faintly like embers in the dark, his skin pale, as if all blood had been burned away. When he breathed, it was slow and deliberate, each inhale sounding almost painful, though he betrayed no weakness. Around him stood the lords of the north, grizzled men who had once sworn to follow him into battle, and younger heirs who had grown up hearing his name spoken with both reverence and sorrow. Now they stared with a mixture of awe and dread. Lord Manderley, heavy and red-faced, broke the silence first. "It is him, by the gods! It is truly him. The young wolf walks again." But Lord Glover stepped forward, his voice sharp with unease. "Does he walk as a man, or as some creature of sorcery? This is no gift of the old gods. This is witchcraft, Targaryen fire and shadow." Robb's gaze turned to him, and the hall fell cold. "You doubt me?" His voice rasped, deep and unfamiliar, echoing as though it carried the roar of a distant flame. "I am Robb Stark. I bled for the North, I died for the North. I remember every betrayal, every knife. Do you think fire could burn that away?" His words sent a shiver through the lords. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of their doubt. Others tightened their jaws, as if daring themselves not to look away. Daenerys Targaryen stood at his side, her silver hair gleaming like moonlight in the torch-lit hall. She did not speak, but her eyes moved across the gathering, weighing each man's reaction. Her presence was as commanding as the man she had resurrected. Together they were not wolf and dragon, but fire and storm. It was Lyanna Mormont, fierce despite her youth, who cut through the tension. "He is our king. Alive or dead, cursed or not, he is Robb Stark. I would follow him again." Her words sparked murmurs. "Some in agreement, others in alarm," Lord Serwyn muttered darkly. "A king who rises from fire is no king of mine. It reeks of dark omens. We cannot trust what we do not understand." Robb's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to the fire pit at the hall's center, the flames reflecting in his ember-lit eyes. "I was betrayed by those sworn to guest right, slaughtered like cattle in a hall not unlike this one. My mother's blood spilled beside me. I have walked through fire and returned, not for your trust, but for vengeance, for justice. The Freys, the Boltons, the Lions of the Rock, they will answer. And the North will rise with me, whether in hope or in fear." His voice carried a power that was not entirely his own. It was the fire speaking through him, lending weight to his wrath. Some lords bowed their heads at once, as though compelled by more than loyalty. Others shifted uneasily, whispering of curses and doom. Daenerys finally spoke, her tone smooth, commanding. "Do you not see the truth? The gods, old or new, chose to return him through fire. My dragons gave him life again, not to haunt you, but to lead you. A wolf and a dragon, together we will break the chains of those who betrayed you." Her words stung with ambition. To some, she sounded like a savior. To others, like a queen who sought to bind their king to her will. Lady Dustin rose from her seat, her voice sharp as steel. "And what of the cost? Fire does not give without taking. You've bound our king to your dragons, Daenerys Stormborn. Who commands him now, his people or you?" Robb's gaze snapped toward her, and the firelight seemed to flare with his anger. "No one commands me." His voice cracked like thunder. "I am Robb Stark. My will is my own." But even as he spoke, Daenerys' hand brushed lightly against his arm, steadying him, calming the storm within. To the watching lords, the gesture was unmistakable, control disguised as comfort. The night ended with oaths given and oaths withheld. Some bent the knee once more, swearing loyalty to the reborn king. Others departed in silence, their doubts festering like wounds left untreated. Winterfell's hall had seen a resurrection, but it had also birthed a divide that no sword could mend. Later, in the quiet of his chambers, Robb stared into the flames of a solitary candle. He no longer dreamed as he once had. Sleep was shallow, haunted by fire and screams. He remembered the Red Wedding not only as a memory, but as a burning wound carved into his soul. He clenched his fists, his voice a whisper. They will all pay. Daenerys stood at the doorway, watching him with eyes that glimmered with both sympathy and calculation. "And with fire and blood," she said softly, "we will collect the debt. Robb turned to her, his ember eyes unblinking. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched his lips, yet it was not the smile of the boy who had once dreamed of honor and glory. It was something darker. The young wolf was gone. In his place stood the cursed king, born of fire and ash. The march south was a thunder that carried across the frozen ground. Robb Stark's banners, once tattered, once thought dead with him, rose again, black direwolf on white, snapping in the cold winds. Yet these were not the same armies that had followed him before the Red Wedding. They marched with awe, fear, and uncertainty, for their king was not entirely mortal anymore. His presence alone silenced quarrels and stiffened spines. When Robb rode at the front, his eyes glowing faintly like embers under the hood of his cloak, men whispered that the old gods had sent him back to right the wrongs. Others muttered that he was a revenant, a cursed soul bound to fire, and that to follow him was to walk into damnation. But no one dared speak against him to his face. Daenerys marched alongside him, her dragons circling the skies, their shadows stretching across the snow. The Northmen had never seen such beasts before, and though they trembled, they also began to believe. A wolf returned from death, and a queen who commanded dragons. Was this not destiny? In the quiet of the night, by the embers of their campfires, Robb would sit apart from the others, his dire wolf spirit long gone, replaced by the crackling whispers of fire that never left him. He barely ate, barely slept. Men who approached him too closely swore they felt heat rising from his skin, as though his blood simmered beneath the surface. One evening, Lord Manderley approached the Queen as she oversaw the feeding of her dragons. His voice was low but urgent. "Your Grace, this thing you've brought back, is he truly Robb Stark or a shadow of him?" The men follow out of fear, not love, and fear breaks quicker than bone. Daenerys did not look at him, her eyes fixed on Drogon tearing apart a carcass. He is both Robb Stark and more. Fire does not return a man unchanged. He remembers his life, his death, his betrayal. That memory will carry him further than love ever could. Manderley frowned, his chins wobbling with disapproval. But can memory lead men? Or will it consume him until all that remains is vengeance? Daenerys finally turned, her gaze sharp as a blade. If vengeance wins us the north, what does it matter? The old lord recoiled, realizing too late that he had underestimated her hunger. She did not simply want the north restored. She wanted it bound to her cause, forged in the same fire that had remade Robb. The first test came swiftly. The Bolton stronghold at the Dreadfort loomed ahead, its banners of the flayed man still fluttering proudly. Roose Bolton, cold and calculating, had believed himself secure, thinking the Starks gone forever. When word reached him that Robb Stark marched again with dragons at his back, even his iron composure faltered. But Ramsay Bolton was not his father. Cruel, mad, and reckless, he rode out with jeering soldiers, eager to face the Ghost King in open battle. "Let the wolf come!" he cried, his laughter echoing across the fields. "I'll cut him down twice, and this time I'll burn his bones myself." The armies clashed beneath grey skies. Northmen fought Northmen, brothers turned against one another by treachery and time. But in the center of it all rode Robb Stark, his sword glowing faintly as though it had drunk from fire. Where he struck, men faltered. Where he rode, fear spread like disease. His eyes burned with unnatural light, and his voice carried above the din. No more knives in the dark. No more betrayal. The North remembers. When Ramsay charged at him, snarling with madness, Robb met him head-on. Their blades clashed, sparks flying. Ramsay laughed, even as his strikes grew desperate. "What are you, Stark? Man, ghost, or monster?" Robb's answer came with a swing that severed Ramsay's sword arm, sending the bastard screaming to his knees. "I am your reckoning." And with one stroke Ramsay's head fell, his grin frozen forever in death. The battlefield fell silent. The Bolton men, seeing their master slain and their banners burning beneath dragonfire, fled or surrendered. The victory was swift, decisive, but it came at a cost. Many of the Northmen looked at their resurrected king not with cheers, but with unease. They had seen his fury, his inhuman glow, the way his sword had burned like a forge. Was he still the young wolf they had once followed, or something else entirely? That night, Daenerys entered Robb's tent, where he sat alone, his face lit by the flicker of a single torch. Blood still stained his armor, but he made no move to clean it. "You've given them what they wanted," she said softly. "Vengeance." Robb looked up, his ember eyes catching the firelight. "Not enough. Roose Bolton still breathes. The Freys still gloat in their halls, and the lions still sit the throne." Her lips curved in a small smile. "Then we will burn them all together." Robb did not return her smile. He stared past her as though seeing something far away, something she could not. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a growl. "Fire gave me back my life. Fire took my soul. I will see this through, Daenerys Stormborn, but when it ends, I fear the man you brought back will be long gone." For a moment even she felt a chill, despite the heat of the tent. She saw not the young wolf, not her ally, but a cursed king whose wrath might one day consume friend and foe alike. Outside, the dragons roared into the night, and the north whispered of omens darker than victory. The twins rose on the horizon, like an insult carved into stone. Two squat towers straddling the green fork, linked by a bridge that had witnessed one of the darkest betrayals in the history of Westeros. It was here the Red Wedding had soaked the stones with Stark blood. Here that Robb Stark had died with knives in his back. Now the wolf had come home, reborn in fire, and the Freys trembled in their halls. Walder Frey, old and sour, still clung to life, though his body sagged like a corpse that refused to lie down. He mocked the rumors when they first reached him. "Robb Stark? Alive? Ha! I saw the boy gutted like a pig. If he walks, then he walks as a ghost. And ghosts can do no harm. But when word came of Ramsay Bolton's death, of a flaming sword and a king with ember eyes, Walder's confidence wavered. He doubled the guards at his gates, sharpened the spikes along the walls, and swore he would not cower like a child. Yet in the silence of night, his hands shook when he lifted his cup. Robb did not march quietly. He made his presence known. Banners of the direwolf rose on every hill, and Daenerys' dragons blackened the skies above the riverlands. Refugees whispered of camps lit not just by fire, but by a glow that came from their king himself. The North remembered, and so did the Freys. When the armies encircled the twins, Daenerys advised caution. "We can starve them, break them slowly. Let fear gnaw at them until they beg for death." But Robb's fury would not be leashed. He rode to the gates, his voice carrying across the water like rolling thunder. "Walder Frey," he roared, his eyes blazing faintly. "Come forth and answer for your crimes. You slew your king beneath the laws of guest right. You butchered my men while they broke bread beneath your roof. You mocked my mother's death with laughter. I'm here for justice. I'm here for vengeance." The Freys peered from the battlements, their faces pale. Some whispered prayers, others spat curses, but none dared open the gate. Then Daenerys spoke from horseback, her voice clear and cold. "If the gates do not open, then the dragons will." The choice was no choice at all. When Drogon swept down from the clouds, his fire poured across the stone, turning the drawbridge into a furnace. Screams echoed, banners burned, and the Freys scrambled like rats in their collapsing den. The gates cracked under the heat, and when they fell, Robb Stark entered the hall of his betrayal. The stench of burning flesh clung to the air. Frey's sons and grandsons cowered in corners, their arrogance stripped away. At the high table, Walder Frey sat hunched, trembling, though still clutching his cup of wine as if it would shield him. His watery eyes fixed on Robb, and for the first time in his long, bitter life, fear hollowed his voice. "Impossible," Walder croaked. "I saw you die. They put your wolf's head upon your shoulders. You are no man, you are a shadow." Robb stepped closer, the glow in his eyes reflecting in Walder's wine. "You are right. I died here, but death did not hold me. And now you will know the cost of treachery." Walder's hand shook so violently that wine spilled down his robes. "Mercy," he whispered, the word choking in his throat. "I was only protecting my house. The Lannisters forced my hand." The hall grew silent, every phrase straining to hear. Robb's voice lowered to a growl. "When you struck me down, you struck the North. You broke the sacred laws. You spat on honor. There will be no mercy. With a single stroke, his blade cut Walder's cup and his throat in the same motion. The old man gurgled, clutching at the air as blood poured down his chest. The young wolf had fallen here, but the cursed king had risen to finish the tale. The hall erupted into chaos. Frey heirs screamed, some begging for forgiveness, others drawing blades in desperation. But the Northmen swarmed them, and the dragon's roars outside shook the stone. By dawn, the twins were painted in fire and blood, every Frey who bore the name slain or scattered. Yet even as the Northmen cheered their vengeance, unease lingered. They watched their king stand amid the carnage, his eyes glowing, his chest heaving as though the fire within him consumed more with each kill. His vengeance had been satisfied, but there was no relief in his face, no peace in his voice. That night, Daenerys found him staring across the ruined bridge, his sword still clutched in his hand. "It is done," she said gently. "The Freys are ashes." Robb did not look at her. "Not done. Never done. The Lannisters remain. Roose Bolton remains. Every hand that held the knives at my wedding still breathes." Daenerys touched his arm, but he did not turn. His body radiated a heat that made her draw back. "You burn too brightly, Robb Stark," she whispered, almost to herself. "One day you may consume us all." He did not answer. His gaze was fixed south toward King's Landing, where lions still roared from their throne. The young wolf was avenged, but the cursed king was only beginning his hunt. The riverlands smoldered in the wake of the Frey's destruction. Smoke curled from the shattered towers of the twins, their proud banners reduced to ash. For the first time since the Red Wedding, the Northmen felt vengeance in their veins, but it was a bitter draught. Too many whispered that their king was no longer the man they had once loved, that the fire had carved him hollow and left only wrath behind. Robb Stark did not hear those whispers. Or perhaps he heard them but no longer cared. His mind was fixed southward, where lions prowled in golden armor and a throne of swords glittered in the sun. The Lannisters had guided Walder Frey's hand, and their power still sat unbroken atop the Seven Kingdoms. Until they were ashes, Robb's war would never end. Daenerys saw it in him, the way his jaw clenched tighter each night, the way he paced like a wolf trapped in a cage. He had tasted vengeance, and it had not sated him. It had only sharpened his hunger. Their armies marched slowly, rebuilding strength. At Harrenhal, they paused to rest, the castle's blackened towers looming like bones against the sky. It was there in the War Council that the first cracks in their alliance began to show. Tyrion Lannister leaned on the table, wine in hand, his mismatched gaze fixed on the map spread before them. "Charging at King's Landing with banners blazing is a fool's errand. You may have numbers, you may have dragons, but the city's walls are thick, and its people are more likely to starve than surrender. A siege will break them without breaking us." Robb's ember-lit eyes narrowed. "A siege is too slow. I will not starve peasants while lions sit fat on their throne. I will strike, and I will tear it from them." Tyrion raised a brow, his tone dripping with irony. "Ah yes, very kingly. Slaughter the small folk who never drew steel against you. Nothing wins loyalty faster than burning villages." Robb's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, and the firelight in his gaze flared. "Mind your tongue, imp. You know nothing of betrayal. You did not watch your mother die with a blade in her throat. You did not choke on your own blood while your bannermen fell around you." Tyrion's face darkened, though he forced a wry smile. "No, I only watched my father try to murder me since birth. But please continue teaching me about betrayal." The council tensed, eyes shifting between the two men. For a moment it seemed Robb might draw his blade then and there. But Daenerys intervened, her voice cutting through the air like steel. "Enough. Tyrion speaks with reason. The people of King's Landing will not love a conqueror who brings only fire. They must see us as liberators, not executioners." Robb turned on her, his voice low, dangerous. "And what of justice? What of Cersei? What of Tywin's brood who planned my death? Will they starve in their beds while I sit idle?" Daenerys stepped closer, her eyes locking on his. "They will pay, I promise you that. But if you burn the city, you will not be a king, you will be a monster. And monsters rule nothing but ashes. For a long moment their wills clashed, wolf against dragon, fire against fire. At last Robb broke his gaze, turning away. His breath came heavy, as though restraining the blaze within him. That night he did not sleep. He stood atop Harrenhal's broken battlements, staring south, his hands gripping the stone, until it cracked beneath his fingers. Shadows of fire flickered in his eyes, and in the stillness of night he whispered to himself, "They all must pay. Every last one." Meanwhile, in King's Landing, word of the cursed king's march reached Cersei Lannister. She sat in the Red Keep, her goblet trembling in her hand. "Impossible," she spat. "Robb Stark is dead. We cut off his wolf's head, we paraded his corpse. He cannot walk again." But Cuban, pale and smiling faintly, inclined his head. "And yet he does, your grace. Fire works strange miracles. If the Targaryen queen truly brought him back, then he is neither man nor ghost, but something in between." Cersei's lips curled into a snarl. "Then he will die again. This time I will see his head on a spike with my own eyes. Twice dead, thrice if need be. Whatever he is, he will not take my throne." But even as she spoke, unease gnawed at her heart. The thought of Robb Stark walking again, glowing with fire and vengeance, haunted her nights. And somewhere deep inside, fear festered, where pride could not silence it. Back at Harrenhal, Daenerys entered Robb's chambers late. He stood in the dark, staring into the flame of a single candle, his eyes reflecting its light until they seemed to burn brighter than the fire itself. "You're slipping further from yourself," she said softly. Robb turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What if I am? The boy you knew, the young wolf, he died at the Twins. What walks now is fire and wrath. And perhaps that is what Westeros needs." Daenerys moved closer, her voice firm but edged with something almost like fear. "Westeros needs a king, not a curse." Robb leaned in, his ember-lit gaze unblinking. "What if I am both?" She held his stare, but in her heart she knew the truth. The wolf she had brought back was no longer hers to guide. He belonged to the fire now, and fire obeyed no master. The march to King's Landing was a storm, unlike anything Westeros had seen in generations. A resurrected Stark at the head of his banners, a Targaryen queen riding dragons overhead. Together they drew lords, sellswords, and common folk alike. Some followed for vengeance, some for freedom. But most followed out of fear, as if to stand against them was to defy fate itself. Along the King's Road, villages emptied before their arrival. Some bent the knee willingly, laying out food and coin as offerings. Others fled into the woods, whispering of the cursed king with eyes of fire. Mothers told their children to be silent, lest Robb Stark hear their cries and mark them as traitors. Robb himself rode at the front, silent and grim, his direwolf banners whipping in the wind. He scarcely spoke to his men, scarcely ate. He was consumed by a single vision, Cersei Lannister kneeling before him, her throat bared to the same justice she had denied him. Daenerys rode close by, her dragons shadowing the host. At times she watched Robb with unease. The fire in him seemed to grow hotter each day, as though the march south was stoking the flames of his resurrection. When he spoke, it was with the weight of prophecy. When he looked at her, she saw both an ally and a rival, someone who might one day turn his fury even upon her. At the Blackwater, their armies halted. The charred remains of Stannis Baratheon's failed siege still scarred the shore. Tyrion Lannister, standing beside Daenerys, could not resist a grim smirk. "Ah, the sight of my greatest triumph," he said. "And now the place where I help orchestrate my family's ruin. Life is nothing if not entertaining." Robb ignored him, his gaze fixed on the walls of King's Landing, rising in the distance like jagged teeth. He could almost hear the laughter of Freys echoing there, the clink of goblets, the sneer of Tywin's plans. His hand gripped his sword so tightly the leather creaked. That night, Daenerys called a council. The lords of the north, her unsullied captains and Tyrion, all gathered around the firelit map. She spoke of strategy, of surrounding the city, of cutting supply lines, of waiting until the gates opened of their own accord. But Robb slammed his hand down on the table, making cups jump. No more waiting, no more sieges. We go through the gates, or we go over the walls. I will have Cersei's head before the moon wanes. The Lord shifted uncomfortably. Some murmured agreement, hungry for swift victory. Others looked to Daenerys, waiting for her to temper his fire. She did. "And how many innocents will burn with her?" she asked sharply. "Do you think the fire within you will spare them? Or will you leave King's Landing a tomb of ashes, with no throne left to claim?" Robb's ember eyes flared as he met her gaze. "What is a throne worth if justice is denied? They did not spare my men, my mother. Why should I spare them?" Tyrion's voice cut through, weary but firm. "Because justice and vengeance are not the same thing, Stark. If you cannot see the difference, then perhaps you truly are cursed." Robb's hand twitched toward his sword. The firelight around him seemed to burn brighter, hotter, as though answering his rage. For a heartbeat, it seemed the council might end in blood. But Daenerys stood, her voice ringing with command. "Enough! You are not the only one who has lost family to the lions. You are not the only one who burns for justice. But if you storm those gates with fire, you will not be remembered as a king. You will be remembered as a monster. And monsters do not rule. They are slain." Her words struck the hall into silence. Robb's breathing was heavy, ragged, his hands trembling. At last he turned and strode from the tent, the heat of his presence lingering even after he was gone. The next day, the city awoke to terror. Dragons wheeled in the sky, their shadows stretching across the walls. The Northmen encamped at the Blackwater, their chants echoing against stone. The gold cloaks faltered on their patrols, and the bells of the sept rang as if for a funeral. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei stood before the Iron Throne, her children at her side. Tommen clung to her skirts, his face pale with fear, while Myrcella tried to hide her trembling hands. Only Joffrey, sneering as always, spat defiance. "Let them come. I'll mount that wolf's head on the gates myself." Cersei silenced him with a look that could cut glass. Yet behind her fury, dread hollowed her. She could not stop imagining the boy she had seen slaughtered at the Twins, now risen with fire in his eyes, marching to tear her world apart. Qyburn entered, bowing low. "Your Grace, the cursed king is at your gates. He calls for your surrender. If you open the gates, perhaps mercy might yet be bargained." Cersei's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Mercy from a ghost raised by dragons? No, Qyburn, we will not open the gates. Let the North see how lions fight when cornered." But even as she spoke, she could feel it, the city itself trembling. The people's fear of famine, of fire, of a king who had already died once and returned stronger. Outside the walls, Robb Stark stood astride his horse, his gaze fixed on the Red Keep. In his mind, he saw his mother's blood spilling again, the knives flashing, the jeers of his enemies. His chest burned with fire, his sword glowed faintly in the night, and he whispered to himself, "This ends tonight." The bells of King's Landing tolled at dawn, their sound rolling over the city like a dirge. To the common folk it was a signal of dread. To the soldiers on the walls it was a warning. And to Robb Stark it was a call to vengeance. He stood before the gates, direwolf banners rising behind him, the air thick with the smell of dragonfire. Daenerys rode beside him, her silver hair whipping in the wind, Drogon circling overhead like a black shadow of doom. The city trembled at the sight, yet the gates did not open. "They mean to resist," Daenerys murmured, her eyes scanning the battlements. "Even with dragons above them, they cling to pride." Robb's gaze burned toward the Red Keep, where the Iron Throne glimmered beyond stone and smoke. His voice came low, rough. "Then pride will burn with them." Daenerys caught the edge in his tone. She turned sharply, her words firm. "Not the people, Robb. This city is filled with innocence. We came to free Westeros, not to slaughter it." But he did not answer. His hands clenched the reins, his ember-lit eyes fixed on the walls, as though he could already see Cersei's face leering down at him. The fire within him pulsed stronger, whispering for release. The horns of war blared, arrows loosed from the walls, hissing down like rain. But the dragons answered with fire, sweeping across the battlements, scattering gold cloaks in screaming chaos. Siege towers rolled forward, Northmen roared as they charged, and the battle for King's Landing began. Robb was the first through. He moved like a storm, his sword glowing faintly with each strike, flames licking at the edges as if the fire itself guided his hand. Men fell before him, some shrieking, others simply dropping their weapons and fleeing. To his soldiers, he was no longer just a king. He was a force of nature, unstoppable, unrelenting. The city crumbled quickly. Streets filled with smoke and blood, people running in terror as dragonfire split the sky. Daenerys did her best to restrain the fury of her beasts, guiding them toward soldiers, siege weapons, and walls. But war is not clean. Markets burned, homes collapsed, and screams rose from every quarter. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister watched the flames rising from her city. Her hands shook as she clutched her goblet, though her voice stayed sharp. "So the wolf returns. Let him come. I'll not beg a corpse for mercy." Beside her, Joffrey quailed for the first time, his arrogance crumbling at the sound of dragons shrieking above. "Mother, we must flee. We cannot fight this." "Silence," Cersei snapped, her eyes never leaving the fires below. "We are lions. If the wolf means to take this throne, he will choke on it." The gates of the Red Keep shattered beneath dragonfire. Robb entered with his men, the direwolf banners cutting through smoke and flame. Every step echoed like doom, his ember eyes glowing brighter in the darkened hall. At last, he reached the throne room. The Iron Throne loomed ahead, jagged and cruel, and before it stood Cersei Lannister, draped in crimson. Her children gathered around her like frightened cubs. "So," she sneered, though her voice trembled at the edges. "The young wolf returns. Or should I call you something else now? The Ghost King? The dragon's pet?" Robb's steps echoed as he approached. His voice was low, heavy with fire. "Call me what you wish. It will not save you." Joffrey lunged forward, face twisted in rage. "You don't scare me. I am the king." Robb's blade flashed. Joffrey's crown clattered across the floor before his body did. Silence fell, broken only by Myrcella's sobs and Tommen's frightened whimpers. Cersei's mask of defiance cracked, but she lifted her chin. "Strike me down, and what are you but a butcher? Is this justice, Stark, or only vengeance?" For a moment something flickered in Robb's eyes. Memory, doubt, perhaps the ghost of the boy he had once been. But the fire surged, drowning it. He raised his sword. Daenerys' voice rang out behind him. "Robb, stop!" He froze, the blade trembling in his grip. She stepped forward, her gaze burning into him. "If you kill her like this, in front of her children, you will not be a king. You will be a curse upon Westeros. The people will not follow a monster." The hall held its breath. Robb's chest heaved, his ember-lit eyes torn between wrath and restraint. At last he lowered the blade, but only slightly. His voice came like thunder. "Cersei Lannister, for treachery, for murder, for betrayal of the laws of gods and men, you are condemned." He turned, his eyes meeting Daenerys's. "But the queen is right. Let her live." Gasps filled the hall. Cersei herself staggered, disbelief etched into her face. Robb's voice dropped, harsh as steel. "Lock her in the dungeons. Let her rot where she cannot scheme. That is her justice." The soldiers moved swiftly, seizing her. She fought, spitting curses, but her strength was gone. She was dragged away, her children clinging to her until guards tore them apart. The Iron Throne stood empty, blackened by the smoke drifting through shattered windows. Robb approached it, his eyes glowing in the firelight. The lords of the north, the unsullied and the freed captains of the city all knelt as one. But he did not sit. He turned, looking at Daenerys. For a long moment their gazes locked, wolf and dragon, fire and fire. At last Robb spoke, his voice steady but hollow. "This throne is yours. I did not rise from fire to rule it. I rose for vengeance, and now it is done." Daenerys' breath caught. She saw the truth in his ember eyes. He was not a man who could rule, not anymore. He was fire-given flesh, a curse that walked until its purpose burned out. She stepped forward, her hand brushing his arm, but he pulled away, his body radiating heat. I am not the boy who once dreamed of crowns. That boy died at the Twins. What stands here is the fire's justice. And fire does not stay. With that, Robb Stark, the cursed king, turned and walked from the hall. The Iron Throne remained empty, and his shadow burned against the walls until it was swallowed by the smoke of victory. Westeros had its vengeance. But peace had died with the young wolf, and it had not risen again.